Okay, good morning, everyone. So the time is now just about 11 o'clock. So we're going to get started on our webinar now. I can see there's still a few people joining, but yeah, they'll just come in over the next few minutes. Thank you very much to everyone for coming to the webinar. We're going to talk about air-to-air heat pumps today. This is a topic that we think is really interesting at the moment. There's lots of opportunities, and we're going to share some of the highlights of what we've been looking at. So first of all, just to introduce ourselves, I'm Lindsay Sugden, and I lead our heat research here at Delta, and I'm joined by my colleague Kate, and I can just let Kate give a few words on herself.
Morning everyone, my name's Kate Lyon and I manage our electrification of heat research within the wider heat work at Delta.
Thanks, Kate. Okay. This is what we're going to cover in the webinar today. It's gonna last for about half an hour, and there'll be a few minutes at the end for questions. If you do have some questions, then please use the question box at the right. So we just show what that looks like here. So answer your questions there. We'll try to get through questions during the webinar, but if we don't have time to get through all of them, we will get back to you afterwards. So as I said, we think that there are good opportunities for air-to-air heat pumps in Europe, and we're going to share some highlights of the work that we've done on this topic recently. So first of all, as I know there's quite a lot of you joining who are not so familiar with Delta, a bit of background on Delta EE. We're a research and consulting company focusing on enabling our clients to capture market opportunities in the energy transition. Heat is a central pillar of what we do, and it's one of the longest running research areas that we have. So we've been immersed in this sector for more than 15 years. Our core clients for Delta are in Europe and Japan, but we also do research spanning the wider globe. And specifically in the heat research area, we have 3 heat subscription services where clients subscribe annually to access our research. So there's the heating business service, which focuses on how heating solutions get to market. And then we have the Electrification of Heat Service and the gas heating service, which assess the opportunity for electric and high efficiency gas heating. I'll let Kate say a few more words on the Electrification of Heat Service.
Yeah, that's great. Lindsay, just before we continue, we have had a question pop up. Somebody's saying they can't hear us. We think we're broadcasting. If someone else can hear us, maybe they could just drop us a little comment in the questions box to say that they
would be great.
can. I wonder if this is just an individual. Okay, it sounds like several people have got back to us and said they can hear us, so that's lovely. Maybe that one individual's got a bit of a problem with their connection. All right, lovely for that.
Yeah, just on that, if there is anyone who's struggling to hear, we are recording this session, so we can send it to you afterwards. But I guess if they can't hear, then they can't hear me saying that.
They've just messaged to say it's fixed, actually, so that's lovely.
Okay.
But thanks very much, everyone.
Okay,
good.
so Kate.
Yeah, so thanks, Lindsay. Back to the Delta research. As I said at the start, I manage the Electrification of Heat Service, specifically within the wider heat research that Delta does. The Electrification of Heat Service looks at the growing opportunities for electric heating technologies. So that includes both heat pumps and other electric heating appliances in Europe and other markets as we see the shift towards decarbonisation and higher efficiency. And it also looks at new opportunities that are emerging for electric heating to play a wider role within the electricity system as the electricity system itself moves to being more renewable intermittent generation, and more flexibility is needed from demand side loads. And this new piece of research we're talking about today, the on-air heat pump markets, sits within the electrification of heat.
Great, so thank you, Kate. So now we can move on to highlights of our research in this area. So the scope that we're going to cover in this webinar is air-to-air heat pumps in the residential market in Europe. And we're going to have a focus on air-to-air heat pumps for heating applications. So why do we think that the time is now for air-to-air heat pumps? Well, we see three main reasons. Firstly, the political focus on decarbonisation of heat. So air-to-air heat pumps are a cost-effective solution for decarbonisation of heat. The second point is the falling heat demand in buildings. So tightening building regulations are increasing energy efficiency of buildings, meaning heat demand is falling, cooling demand is growing. There's more and more focus on indoor climate and ventilation and so on. Hydronic heat pumps don't always make the most sense, and air-to-air heat pumps are well placed to capture a share of this market. The final point is the maturity of the technology and the availability of it. So air-to-air heat pumps are well established. Obviously, it's a global air conditioning market, but they're well established for heating as well as cooling. They're widely available through many sales channels. They're relatively easy to install and relatively low cost compared to hydronic heating, all making them strong opportunities for air-to-air heat pumps. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to talk us through what the technology environment looks like before we dive into more details on the opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lindsay. So just before we go through the different technical options that we see available in the market, I thought it'd be good to tackle a question that we got asked quite often as we were doing the research in this, which was, is there any difference between an air-air heat pump and what you would call an air conditioning unit? So the answer is mostly no, but also a little bit of yes. And to explain what I mean by that, in the research we did and the conversations we had, we broadly found out that the fundamental technology and operation is the same in both kinds of appliance, and all the solutions on the market today can technically perform both heating and cooling functions. So in that respect, there is no major technical difference. But then you can make some optimization, often using software and the control strategies for heating or cooling, depending on which applications you're targeting the appliance at and how you're marketing it. And also, if you're wanting to sell these as a heating appliance in some of the cooler climates, for example, the Nordic markets, there are some different choices you might make around sizing certain components like compressors or making alterations to the fan unit so that it will work well in these other climates. So broadly, the fundamental underlying technology is the same, but you can get some optimization to make them better suited to one thing or another. So moving on to those different technology types then, we see three main technology types for use in the residential heating market in Europe. So the first are these single split systems, where you have a single indoor unit and a single outdoor unit connected by one refrigerant loop. This is the technology type we see being most common in the market at the moment. It's also the lowest cost and the easiest to install. And it's used for either heating or cooling a single zone within a building. And although they can be put into any building size really as a cooling appliance, we see them being most used to provide heating in small and medium-sized family homes. And the second technology option is multi-splits. This is where you have multiple indoor units connected to a single outdoor unit. And each of these indoor units has its own dedicated refrigerant loop running to the outdoor unit. So this technology configuration brings the advantage that you can heat or cool multiple rooms or multiple zones within the same dwelling, all from just one outdoor box. But the key limitation of this technology is that all the units have to run in either heating mode or in cooling mode. So you can't have some units doing one and some units doing another. And in terms of residential use, we see these mostly going into larger family homes. And the final technology type we have is the VRF system, where VRF stands for variable refrigerant flow. So as in a multi-split, you have multiple indoor units connected to a single outdoor unit, but the key difference is that you have just one single refrigerant loop that goes to each of the indoor units. And there's then a set of valves or branch controllers which can vary the refrigerant flow to each indoor unit, which is where the name comes from. And if the system has heat recovery built in as well, you can run these so that the different indoor units do heating or cooling in different zones simultaneously. The system can also be used to make some hot water as well. And in terms of where we see these being installed in residential properties, these are mostly going into multifamily homes.
Okay, thank you, Kate. So clearly there's many technology options suitable for the residential heating market across Europe, but where do we see the main market opportunities and when will they be? Well, if we start with the new build sector today, there's around 100,000 homes per year in Europe are built with dry electric heating at the moment. So this is already a clear opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps, where there's no real competing technologies that are better than them to displace direct electric heating. Moving towards 2025, we expect growth in the new build air-to-air heat pump market to perhaps several hundreds of thousands of units per year as hydronic heat distribution systems become less dominant, and air-to-air heat pumps can displace gas and other forms of hydronic heating as well in the new build sector. Now, in retrofit, below, the low-hanging fruit for air-to-air heat pumps is displacing, again, dry electric and other individual room heating. The addressable market is already around 500,000 retrofits per year. Moving towards 2025, there's further retrofit opportunities in air-to-air, also providing supplementary heating and cooling in homes that have other types of hydronic systems. We'll look a bit more closely at both new build and retrofit in the following slides. So firstly, focusing on new build, we see two trends which are really driving the opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps here. Firstly, the shift away from fossil fuels towards electrification. And secondly, the shift away from hydronic to non-hydronic heat distribution. So firstly, the shift away from fossil fuels towards electrification is evident in the many proposed or implemented effective bans on fossil boilers or gas connections in the new build sector. So we're seeing many countries across Europe, as well as some examples from Australia, Canada, the US, where countries and regions are proposing to outlaw fossil fuels in heating. In most cases across Europe, the proposals are for implementation by at least 2025. If we look at other of Europe's major heating markets, so France, Italy, and Germany, the outlook is still fairly bleak for fossil boilers in new build, thanks to ever-increasing minimal renewable energy share requirements, which makes it increasingly difficult. In both these cases, in terms of what technology is currently available today, then heat pumps we think are going to be the biggest winners in new build, and this applies to both hydronic and air-to-air heat pumps. So the opportunity for electric heat pumps in new build is relatively clear, but what makes new build homes even more interesting for air-to-air heat pumps specifically, as opposed to hydronic systems, is the impact of tightening building regulations, which are ultimately likely to reduce the dominance of hydronic heating systems. So increased insulation and air tightness in homes is driving down heat demand and therefore required heating capacity. At the same time, it's driving up demand for cooling. It's also driving up the demand for cooling. These are the perfect conditions for air-to-air heat pumps. There's a need for a solution that can provide cooling, and non-hydronic systems like air-to-air heat pumps are a good cost-effective solution instead of installing a hydronic system. So this is not just something which is going to happen in the future. We are witnessing the early stages of this trend already. So some housing developers in some markets are already choosing air-to-air heat pumps instead of hydronic systems. And the signs are that this trend is only going to get stronger, driving the opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps ever upwards. So I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to look at a couple of examples of this opportunity in new build in a bit more detail.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. So here are some examples taken from our recent report on the topic. And we think these illustrate the point Lindsay's just been making, which is that the move away from hydronic and towards air-based heating in new build is already happening in some places as a result of building regulations. So the first example is the French market. And this is a market where air-air heat pump solutions are now starting to displace air-water heat pumps in some homes as the main source of heating. And the major driver behind this has been the building regulations in France. The RT 2012 sets a minimum level of energy in the home for heating and cooling that must be met by renewables, as well as a minimum requirement on insulation levels. And a growing number of house builders are realizing that for smaller homes, so typically 1 to 2 bed family single homes, the cheapest way for them to meet those required standards is an air-air heat pump. So the air-air heat pump will do the main living area for space heating and then for cooling in summer. And there'll maybe be some additional direct electric panels to boost heat in other rooms, smaller rooms, and it's usually combined with a hot water heat pump for domestic hot water. There are around 130,000 new build single family homes a year in France, of which we estimate about 30% are already being built with electric heating of some variety. And we think that well over half of these are likely to be air-air heat pumps with a bit of backup direct electric. So this is a market where this application is becoming reasonably mature. Volumes are in the tens of thousands a year already into this application. And this means there are lots of players present in this space. Among some of the leading brands are some of the well-known Asian brands like Daikin and Mitsubishi. And there are also some heating background companies, for example, Group Atlantic, who work with Fujitsu to provide a solution into the new build family home market. And the other example where we see this happening is the UK. So similar in terms of drivers, but slightly different in terms of the technology that we see being installed and the typical application. So in the UK at the moment, most new build homes are built with gas-based hydronic heating, and this is also true in multi-family homes. But what we're seeing is some high-end developments in particular parts of the country. For example, this building in London, which uses VRF units from Mitsubishi, we're seeing a shift towards air-air heating as a way of providing year-round thermal comfort. So this is happening because of both regulatory push, as in France, and also customer pull in terms of wanting that year-round good level of heating in the winter and cooling in the summer. And the regulatory push in this case today is the local planning requirements, specifically in London, which are much stricter than the rest of the UK. But in future, we could see this become more common throughout other parts of the country as the UK national building regulations are updated later this year and in 2025. And as I said, another key selling point in these is that these are high-end, they're luxury apartments. People are wanting a certain level of comfort met throughout the year. So this is more of an emerging market in the UK than the France example that we've just seen. The market volume is probably quite low, around the low thousands at the moment, but we do see that this could well grow as building regulations tighten further.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate. So that was some good insight onto the opportunity in new builds. As we said, there's also an opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps in retrofit. The most immediate opportunity lies in homes with no central heating system, and this is quite a sizable market, around 10 million homes across Europe. The majority of these have some form of electric heating, perhaps combined with additional room heaters such as coal or wood-burning stove. The map here just gives an impression of the markets in Western Europe with the highest proportion of electric heating. So markets like Norway and France, for example, are two of the markets with the highest penetration already of air-to-air heat pumps. So what is the driver for air-to-air heat pumps to displace existing room heaters in these markets? Well, the biggest driver is end-user led. Air-to-air heat pumps are a relatively low upfront cost way to save on running costs. It's quite easy to make the economics stack up when replacing direct electric heating with an air-to-air heat pump. And on top of that, air-to-air heat pumps can be relatively easy to install, especially single splits, which we'll see as the dominant air-to-air solution, which would be replacing electric room heaters. So I'm going to hand over to Kate again to look at a couple of examples in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So moving on now to some case studies of retrofit from our report. And the first place we're going to look is the Nordics, which, as I think Lindsay has said, are already quite well established as major air heat pump markets in Europe. And a key trend in many of these is air heat pumps being used to displace direct electric heating that's currently in people's homes. This is especially true in the countries of Norway, Finland, and Denmark. There's a high proportion of homes currently using dry electric direct heating. In Denmark, for example, we estimate around 20% of single-family homes today use electric heating, and that share is even higher in Norway and Finland. And this time, the major driver is about pull from the customer rather than push from regulations. So as Lindsay said, compared to direct electric, air heat pumps offer customers lower running costs, giving bill savings. And it's also a greener, more efficient option, which tends to be a bigger driver in the Nordic markets than maybe some other places in Europe. And the lower upfront cost means they are a cheaper way for people to decarbonise and to be greener. And it's also much less hassle than moving to a hydronic heat pump for space heating. And people also like it because you can do room by room replacement as your individual electric heaters are up for replacement, or you want to replace them with something that's more efficient and lower running cost. And the other factor in the Nordic markets, which means that these technologies are becoming more and more popular in terms of replacing old electric radiators, is that the awareness of air heat pumps as a technology is generally very high in these markets. And that's partly thanks to the fact there's wide availability through a lot of different retail channels. For example, you can even get these appliances stocked in some of the major DIY and home improvement stores. And then the other example that we wanted to show with you is in France, back to France again. As in the Nordics, the main place where air heat pump is gaining ground in terms of displacing traditional or existing heating is in the direct electric heating market. Again, it's a bit of a no-brainer in terms of reducing running costs. But the other driver, of course, which is bigger in France than in the Nordic markets, is the growing demand for cooling. So the temperatures in summer in France and throughout most of Central Europe, in fact, even as far as the UK, have been rising over previous years. And the trend that we tend to see happening in the French market is that people will install one of these units in one room primarily for cooling, but during the installation process or the research, or even while they have the unit, they become aware that it can do very efficient space heating as well. And then as other electric heating in the home fails or they want to upgrade it, they're looking at moving to air heat pumps as a way of reducing their running costs and also having the benefit of cooling. So again, as per the Nordic market, the most common technology we see installed is single split because it's easiest to use to do these piece by piece replacements and room by room replacements. But we are also seeing some multi-splits going in where people are choosing to do a more substantial replacement. So those are two case studies where we see the change away from direct electric to air heat pumps already happening. And as I say, we can only see this getting a bigger opportunity.
Great, thanks very much, Kate. So we see a lot of opportunities both in retrofit and in new builds for air-to-air heat pumps. We've talked about the opportunities. Air-to-air heat pumps can contribute to decarbonising both new build and retrofit. They can give end users running cost savings. But how valuable is the market, and is it really worth engaging? And the short answer is we think it's very valuable. So the current European air-to-air heat pump market is at least as valuable as the hydronic heat pump market is today. So about 3 times as many air-to-air heat pumps were installed as hydronic heat pumps last year. So the average, if we look at the average cost of these products, air-to-air heat pumps are kind of roughly a third of the price of a hydronic heat pump, for example. So that brings us to a market value of around 8 billion euros a year. We think this opportunity is only going to grow. We think there's opportunities for heating manufacturers, air conditioning companies, and energy suppliers in air-to-air heat pumps. So just here, I'm just highlighting some of what we see as the interesting current and future value streams for air-to-air heat pumps. So we've talked about the opportunities in new build and retrofit, which we show at the top there. Ignoring air-to-air heat pumps will really mean missing out on a key part of the heating market, especially moving towards the future where heat demand is reducing and so on. We see air-to-air heat pumps only becoming more important. On top of that, there's opportunities to upsell air-to-air heat pumps for supplementary heating or cooling alongside other heating systems, including gas boilers, for example. Seeing examples of air-to-air heat pumps being installed in garages, conservatories, these kind of additional rooms of houses where there's some needs for additional heating, for example. There are opportunities to offer more valuable customer propositions based around the air-to-air heat pump. For example, like combining heat pump with PV or home energy management to offer a kind of optimization, a household optimization service. Then you've also got emerging trends like comfort as a service models. Moving towards the future, we see the heating market becoming much more of a thermal comfort market with just as much need for cooling as heating. And air-to-air heat pumps are fairly unique in that they're able to offer both of these. There's also emerging energy market value streams available through using air-to-air heat pumps in demand response flexibility applications. So air conditioning units are already well established for this application. In Europe, they're one of the most used flexible resources in demand response in Europe at the moment. So this is already basically being well tested. So ultimately, we think there are many reasons to engage in this market and few reasons to ignore it. We think that acting now means that these opportunities can be captured. So just looking at the time, we have seen there's quite a few questions have come in, and we've got time to answer some of them. Where we don't have time to get back to you, where we don't have time to answer the question just now, we'll certainly get back to you. But just looking at one question that's come through here. So I think this is for Kate. You mentioned comfort as one of the factors in the UK, which is driving the opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps in new builds. What about France? Isn't it also a driver there? Kate, do you want to give some words on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good point. And yes, in the UK, I did stress that it's often comfort in these high-end buildings is one of the pull factors for these going in. It's definitely also the case in France that people are wanting cooling in the home. They like having that ability. It's actually a bit of a quirk of the building regulations in France that because these energy efficiency and energy efficiency standards are quite high, you actually need to design the house with an air heat pump and only say the air heat pump's going to be used for heating. You actually have to sort of commission the building, as it were, with the cooling function turned off. But we understand that a lot of customers, once they're into the house, then go back and contact a heating engineer to turn it back on for cooling in the summer. So yes, although the push is from the regulation side in France, definitely people are also wanting these because it will be able to provide cooling in the hot weather.
Great, thanks, Kate. Okay, just looking at another question here. What about low GWP refrigerants is asking. So I guess that we're talking about what the impact of the kind of F-gas regulation and so on, phase down of high GWP refrigerants. Well, in the air-to-air market, the majority of technology manufacturers have already launched a an air-to-air heat pump using the refrigerant R32, which you could call a kind of medium global warming potential refrigerant. So we don't see this causing problems in the next 5 years in terms of refrigerant availability and cost. We know that there's more companies working on follow-up lower GWP products. There's lots of activity around propane, for example. So I think moving forward, the industry is ready and it's preparing. I mean, one possibility is that in multi-family homes or kind of large installations, VRF systems could begin to have problems. You could also install a heat pump chiller instead, which would avoid having refrigerant piping going around the building. So this is one kind of possibility, but essentially we see the industry as being fairly well prepared. Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. So also related to new build, Kate, you give the example of the high-rise building in London. You said it's VRF, but the VRF can't provide the hot water. So what is providing the hot water? Can you answer this one, Kate?
Yeah, of course, that's fine. We've had another question I see from someone else that just more generally asks this question as well, which is what's doing the hot water if you have an area heat pump for space heating. So I'll answer both of those together. Starting with the general one, you're right, the person who asked the question, in that an area heat pump won't typically do your water heating, so you need an additional appliance. That could be a traditional gas-fired appliance, like a gas boiler, but purely for hot water. It could also be an electric hot water solution. If you don't have a very high hot water demand, then an electric instantaneous heater could meet it. In some markets like France, you could see a domestic hot water heat pump being put in alongside. And then going to the particular example in London with the VRF system, in a lot of cases at the moment, that will be a shared gas boiler that will be producing hot water for multiple apartments. But in the future, with tightening building regulations, and we're already starting to see this trend in London with the specific planning needs they have there, you could actually see the market moving towards an air water heat pump potentially to do hot water for these buildings.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Okay, I can see another question which just says, are we being too positive about the opportunity for air-to-air heat pumps? Then this is a good question. So I think that we do think that there is a big opportunity here, and there's many drivers. In a lot of ways, the opportunity is simpler than when we're talking about decarbonisation of existing buildings which already have kind of gas boilers and so on. I think the retrofit opportunity is, as long as we look at the direct electric market, this is very clear, and it's already happening. I think when we look at the new build market, yes, it's dependent on exactly how policy goes. We talked about, there's a lot of proposals in new builds to effectively ban gas. If these kind of proposals are watered down, if the gas industry really fights them, then it may be that the electrification of new build slows down. But even if these bans don't come in, we think the direction of travel is clearly away from fossil fuels, and electric heat pumps are still best placed to displace them. In terms of the transition away from hydronic systems, yes, there's certainly a question on how fast and how far a shift away from hydronic systems could happen. As we said, there's already indication of this happening in some sectors. Just to be clear, we certainly don't expect the majority of new build market to be non-hydronic by as soon as 2025, but we do think the direction of travel is clear. Buildings are becoming increasingly insulated. You have lower and lower heating demand, and the economic case for installing a hydronic heat distribution system is going to get weaker as we go forward. So we think there'll be significant steps by 2025, but it certainly won't be kind of 50 to 100% non-hydronic by then.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, isn't it, Lindsay? We're not saying there isn't a place for hydronic heat pumps in some applications going forwards. I think just that we see that with the trends specifically in the new build market, and also the ease with which these could be put into homes that use individual direct electric heaters at the moment, if you aren't looking at air heat pumps as a solution as well, then you're probably not going to be able to address the needs of the whole market.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I can see that there are other questions, but I think just keeping an eye on time, I think we're going to have to stop there. But for all the people who've asked questions in the question box there, where we haven't answered, we will get back to you. So we hope that you find this webinar informative and it gave a good flavour of some of the research we're doing. It maybe gave you something to think about. As we said at the start, the materials we've presented here were taken from our in-depth report on air-to-air heat pumps, which we've done under our Electrification of Heat Service. If you'd like to know more about it or our wider work, then please get in touch. You can also find out more about our research on the website or by following us on LinkedIn or by listening to our podcast, Talking New Energy. So it just leaves me to say thank you to Kate and thank you all for coming. And we look forward to discussing this topic with you again in future. I'm going to end the webinar now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.